go anywhere, and I like that too. It just makes it nice and stable. I took a lot of care to make sure that the step got in the center of the boat. You know, if the step is slightly off center one way or the other, it's going to be practically impossible to tune your rig. As far as getting the top of the rig in the center, what I do is I take the main sheet, I loosen everything, loosen your head stay, you know, make sure there's no bang on or anything like that, and I bring it down in between these. Get it nice and tight and check it to the middle of the pin. And then walk through like this, around over to here, and I do the exact same thing. And the idea is if when you get it with the same amount of pressure on that halyard, you get it to the same point in the top of the rig's in the center of the boat. You can also do it with the jib halyard, but I like doing it with the main halyard. The jib halyard for a fractional rig actually makes a little more sense. But because you know when you use the main halyard, you know the top of the rig can bend a little bit. But assuming you use the same amount of pressure, then you're probably getting a good read on it. So obviously, if your thumb or your mark on the line ends up being a little bit lower or a little bit higher than the center of that pin, then obviously the top of the rig isn't in the same place, and you need to adjust your turnbuckles accordingly, lengthen or shorten them. So it's an iterative process. You go back and forth till you get them in the middle of the boat, and then you start, once you get at the center, then you can tune your rig. Now, everyone tunes their rigs differently around here. There's all this talk, the historical talk about how, you know, on a Rhodes 19, loose is better. My uppers are around 28 on a loose gauge.
That's one kind of loose gauge. There's several loose.
Well, the little one.
Okay.
Okay. And I never changed them. The other boat that I remember having fairly tight uppers was Norm's. His were always around 28, 29. Jeremy Boxon, who was always pretty fast, had 28, 29. You know, I think it depends on how new your ribs are. If you have good solid ribs, then 28 or 29, you know, just tightens the rig. If you've got soft ribs, what you do is you pull the center of the boat together. And I tried a hard rig before I got new ribs, and it just made the boat slower. So, you know, you got to sort of find what works on your boat. So that's the uppers. The lowers, by the way, I mean, this isn't a set it and forget it. Every day before I go racing, I check the rig tuning, I make sure it's in the center of the boat, I pull out the loose gauge, I check it. You know, this is it's just part of my regular pre-race routine, because the stuff does change. And it's also, by the way, not something that works particularly well when it's on the trailer. Once you put the boat in the water, everything kind of settles a little bit, so you know, you can get it close out of the water, but if you're on a slight incline or whatever, then you're not going to get an accurate reading. The lowers I don't even mess with until I'm on my way out to the race course. And the approach to the lowers is you go close hold on one side, you know, get down like this and sight up the rig. My approach in anything up to 15 knots is to have a slight sag at the spreaders. You know, sag to lure. And then I go close hold on the other, and you know, just adjust them until it's like that on both sides. If it's straight, perfectly straight, it's a little less power because it's a little less full. If it's more sagged off, it's a little more power. So a lot of the way Christina and I sail, because we have relatively light crew weight, is that we can't be overpowered. So you know, at 14, 15 knots, I tune these so that it's straight at the spreaders instead of sagged off. That depowers it a little bit. So every day, every condition, I go out and do that. I guess the other thing's the head stay. A key component in how well your sails balance each other is how much sag you have in your head stay. That's how much I have in mine. That might be a little tighter than some folks. Again, I think it depends on how much weight you sail with. You know, the more sag you have, the more power you're going to get. Again, we're light, so the trade-off is the tighter it is, the better point you have. If you have it really tight, you're going to point like a banshee and go dog slow. If you have it real loose, you're going to be going really fast, about 40 degrees off the wind. So that's the trade-off. And your biggest head stay adjuster, by the way, is your main sheet. You know, but you try to get it to a point where once you're fully close hauled in any condition, because it's self-adjusting, then you end up with just the right amount of sag. So you kind of mess with it. And just so you guys know, I set this head stay length 5 or 6 years ago, and I kept experimenting one way or the other, and finally I found the thing that worked, and I haven't touched it since. And I've got another one just like it in case someone gets smart with me and comes along and changes it. And I've got it written down 3 different ways. I mean, but one of the things you can do to depower, if you want, is like, you know, if you see it's going to be blowing 20, you can come in and take a couple of turns and shorten this a little bit, and that'll make your boat a little bit less powered up for a heavy air day. And then the backstay, you know, there's not a lot of mystery to the backstay, except that obviously you want it to work. I've seen a lot of backstays where the backstay leads to right here, and that's, you know, I guess that's functional, but that doesn't do a hell of a lot of good when it comes to adjusting it in a race. I mean, one of your big depowering moves when you're sailing, I mean, you're sitting here hiked out, and you see a puff coming, and you want to, like, you know, you want to tighten up on the backstay and twist off the top of the main. The last thing you want to do is get off the rail and go down there.
Kim? Hey, Kim.
Yes, sir.
Can you tell me how it is you have that backstay rigged under the deck there?
Sure.
What is the process there?
This terminates right here, comes through a block here, goes down here, goes to a block. Okay? And then, basically, there's a block there and a block there. There's a bunch of blocks to lead it, but essentially, the line goes through the block to this block, one that's anchored to here, to this block, and then back over. So, you know, really, the only this is one purchase, and this is the other. So it's a...
what sort of power do you... You don't have much power, you just have a 2-for-1 power.
4 to 1.
What?
4 to 1.
There's another loop just underneath the back.
Okay, okay. And it's the same on either side of the boat then?
Yeah, and after we're done, feel free to crawl around and take a look.
Okay. In my aged state, it's easier to ask the question.
The other thing I'll tell you about using the backstay is everyone thinks it's a heavy air tool. I happen to think it's a lump tool as well. I mean, I see everyone sailing around on these lumpy days with their backstays kind of flopping all over in the breeze, and their rigs are going everywhere as they're trying to, like, you know, finesse these waves. Well, you know, pull in a little on your backstay. You know, stabilize that rig, you'll feel the boat just kind of like start to go. And it makes a huge difference when no one does it. I've never understood why.
Yeah, so you can get
any questions on the rig stuff? Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, just another data point. I keep pretty much consistent with what Kim said. I go to about 25 on the uppers, so not quite as tight. Usually have a little more weight, so I almost never adjust the lowers, but basically the same thing as Kim. Once you get out close haul, I check and just have a little bit of sag, and unless it really starts blowing, then I'll straighten it out. And also, I totally agree with the backstay thing. I have mine not the way it should, and I'm always reaching back and futzing around with it, and it's on my to-do list, so I think it's a good thing to do.
Yes, sir.
Some people, you might see Vets by Jay, for example, sail jumpers.
Yep.
Make any comments about them?
All the sailmakers basically say that having the top of the rig twist off or fall off is slow. Well, all the jumpers do is they keep the rig straight up at the top, and it's unsupported by the shroud. And I mean, my personal feeling on it is you optimize the boat to the prevailing condition. Prevailing condition around here is light, you know. So how big a deal is it? You know, if we sailed in Buzzards Bay where it was blowing 25 every day, I think I might have a different feeling about the jumper. But around here, you know, what it is added windage, it's added weight aloft, and I just don't think you need it. And again, because we're light, when it's heavy, having that twist off a little bit up there is not a bad thing. You know, it depowers the boat. So it's kind of a, you know, I think it depends on who you are, how much weight you typically carry, through weight, and where you typically sail. You know, I think it might be right for Ben's. It blows down there sometimes.
And when you go through your controls discussion there, it's done, of course, on the assumption of where you're sitting. Just make that very clear to everybody.
I'm Sorry?
Where you're sitting with your screw weight.
Can you
Oh.
repeat that too? A lot of us
Oh, Doug was just talking about crew weight when we're driving. I'm going to go through all the systems. Why don't I do that since the question now? Basically, the idea is the farther forward you are, the better. And you want your weight as low as possible in the boat and center. So people with stewards have an advantage because the cuddy is farther forward. You can actually get your weight a little farther forward. The way we sail is basically we just kind of go across the front of the boat. You know, in very light air, I can't drive from buoy. I just can't. I'm terrible at it, so I don't even try. In very light air, I'm sitting like this with my legs under here, get it forward, and I'm driving like this. And Christina is hiked the lure. And when it gets a little bit more, she'll come and sit here. And then I'll sit back here. And then I'll get up here as soon as there's enough air, and she'll sit there. And then she'll sit here. And then when finally there's enough air to cause both of us to be on the rail, I'll move back to here and she'll sit here. And then obviously we go to hike mode when it gets heavy enough. Always, and by the way, all those different positions can happen in the same upwind leg. You know, it's every time you feel yourself kind of leaning in, that's when it's time to ask the crew to go down. And hopefully you can get like a crew dynamic going when they notice that you're leaning in and they start to move. I mean, there's a point of heel where the boat just feels right. And there's a point where you're feeling like you need to lean in. And when you're leaning in, the boat's going slow. You're not comfortable, you're leaning in, and so you're not in tune anymore. And, you know, so keeping the boat at the right amount of heel is key. In light air, you want a little bit of heel, obviously, just to keep the sails, you know, full. As the wind gets a little bit higher, then I think sailing the boat flatter is faster.
Kim, do you have to have the right size stick to beat your wife with to get her to do this? What size is that?
She beats me.
Okay.
She's got a whip. I'm the first to concede that I'm the luckiest guy in the world because this is a husband-wife thing. This is our date when we go sailing. That's why we still do it, even though we have to get babysitters for the entire season. I remember one time when we first started this, we were like dead last in a race week, and you know, we were trying to fill the chute after rounding, and she went up to try to fill it, and it got a little puff, and I pulled on the guy, and her face was here, and the pole came back, and it hit her in the nose, and she fell down like this, and blood is coming out. And I said, "Oh my God, I killed my wife." And I ran up here, and she looked at me with blood all over and said, "What are you doing? We're racing." I knew I really had a win. So the main. First of all, halyard. This is my main halyard. This is probably way more than I need, but I like it. This is a Vectris. This is a 5/16 or something like that. 3/8 something like that. But you could lift 3 sonars with this one line. It doesn't stretch at all. It's an acquired taste with the 38s if you're not careful, but I like it. What I like about it is I have this little ball. And I don't use a shack or anything like that. We're going to grommet and what it allows you to do is get the main all the way up. I wish I had a nickel for every. I mean, the black line is where the black line is, and sails are designed to that specification. So you put the sail all the way to the top of the rig, otherwise you're not going to have the right sail shape. You know, when we're sailing and we've had a little slippage or a little, it bothers me. Between races, the first thing I'll do is go head to wind, have Christina drive and go there and get that extra slack out of it. My main is all the way at the top of the mast every single time, no matter what. And I see people with this much space between the main and the top of the rig, and that's just dog's luck. Alcohol.
While we're on those balls, they work really well for main and jib halyards, but I learned the hard way never use them for the chute halyards just because it's coming off tension and on tension, and it can loosen up. And last week it just came off, you know, randomly. So don't use them for the chute halyards.
This is internal alcohol. It's got a 4-to-1 inside. That, you know, it is what it is. It gets pretty well. I'm all in favor of having as much purchase as you need. You know, so if you sail with a real strong guy, you don't need a lot of purchase. If you sail with, you know, a 110-pound woman who doesn't go to, you know, work out and lift weights, then maybe having 4-to-1 makes more sense. In terms of how I use the outhaul, I have it bagged out only on very rare occasions. I don't know what was blowing yesterday. But I mean, I had a fairly tight outhaul yesterday, and it was only blowing like 6 knots. So, I mean, obviously in heavy air you bone it. But there's this point where you kind of get most of the shelf gone. And, we can talk about trimming some a little bit. This is my vang. It just ties around down there. It's a 16-to-1. It's a 4-to-1, 2 cascades, which, you know, I put on there after Christina told me one too many times that she couldn't get any more vang. I don't use the vang upwind at all. I know a lot of people like vang sheeting, and I guess with a bridle it kind of makes a lot of sense. But we don't use it upwind, but we do use it a lot downwind. And we're constantly adjusting it going downwind, because as the puffs come, as the pressure increases, what happens is your boom starts to rise and it twists off the upper leach of your main. And you don't want that. You want that upper leach basically straight, and you want the upper telltale streaming. So, you know, that's constantly kind of tempered with the vang. We have this little device. I mean, this is basically a Cunningham. This is, oh, here it is. This little line goes through, and then this attaches to it. It's just a little purchase system to get Cunningham if you need it. I highly recommend it. For those times when you don't have your main all the way up. Then a traveler. This is a big one in the class. I think we have as many bridles in the class as we do travelers, maybe more bridles at this point. I'm a traveler, man, always have been. And everyone's putting a lot of pressure on me for years to go to the bridle system, but I like the travel. It just works for me. So, I mean, I've left a big hunk of my leg on that thing on a couple of tacks. But notice the way I've set it up is the main sheet is led forward, because this is when I'm adjusting, when I'm sitting here, and the traveler is led aft. So the way I tack is I'll let this off about this much, and then come around, you know, decleat this, and reach over and grab that so it's, you know, tight, and then turn the boat, and then just pull this up as we tack, so that it's up high. And, I mean, it's sort of something you have to practice, but I think you can't. I mean, the big thing in favor of using a bridle is that you can tack cleaner and faster.
Kim, I noticed yesterday you always stay on the new leeward side until you're set on the new tack. You're not going over to the other side during your tack.
In light air, yeah, particularly. Yeah, the idea is you want the boat moving before you start jostling around too much. So when we tack, we both stay lured until the boat's kind of aiming in the right direction, and we can start working our way back up to the weather side without losing too much. And it's usually about 15 seconds after the tack, maybe 20, that we're finally trimmed all the way back in. You know, I mentioned when I let about 6 or 8 inches of main sheet off. The traveler goes all the way up, so the first thing I do is drop the traveler back down to about where it should be, and then I slowly start bringing in the main. Christina starts bringing in the jib, kind of get it back into whatever mode we want to be in for where we are. And with respect to how you trim it,
When you let off 6 or 8 inches, you're not letting the sheet out 6 or 8 inches. You've got purchase like that. So.
I'm letting the sheet out 6 or 8 inches, just enough to like
the cleat.
Yeah.
But at the boom, with your purchase system, you're probably only a couple inches away.
Yeah. I'm using 6 or 8 inches.
So people don't have all that purchase in there.
Then they probably want to let out less. The idea is you just don't want to come out of the tack with the main set at, you know, go fast mode, you know, or point mode, wherever you finished the last beat. As far as how you want your boom trimmed in kind of like regular upswind sailing conditions, I tell you, I see so many guys sailing around with, with their booms 6 inches, 8 inches off the center line. And I just don't understand how you can point that way. I'm always right on center line, maybe just a touch above. That's not where you start. That's not where you come out of attack, but that's where you want to end up when you're trying to get to go faster. With a bridle, I'm not an expert on bridles. Maybe anyone with a bridle wants to jump in here. If you've got the conventional bridle that just goes up and down, I think the way you optimize having the boom in the center of the boat is by having the block on the end of the boom and the block on the bridle almost kissing each other when you're close haul. If you've got the bridle too low, then you're going to end up with too much of a vital line, and that vital line is going to result in the boom being off center. The guys with the bridles that go up and go down, sort of like a traveler, one boat over here, behaves more like a traveler, and we trim it like a traveler, and that's a good thing. Any questions on the main before we move on?
I don't know if you already touched on it. I just said you would briefly. Can you describe what point mode is for you? Exactly how you trim it?
Sure.
Jib.
Yeah. Can I get to the jib and then? Okay. On the jib. I got the jib run up the rig right now, but you can see it's just a shackle on there. The halyard comes up above deck. The way I've got this laid out up here is the 2 halyards are in the center above. This is the jib on the left and the spinnaker's on the right. There's a reason the spinnaker's on the right, because we usually do barrelways, and you're turning from right to left, and you want the boat as flat as possible to assist your turn, and so you have the chute over there. You don't want the halyard over there too, because they're going to end up getting tangled up with each other. It's more likely that the weight will be on this side on the round. Then tracks, turning blocks, fine tune. I'll go on all these. And just down below, real quick, you guys can't see it, but there's a twing on each side. There's a topping lift, downhaul, and a fraculator. I'll go through all this real quick. So anyway, the halyard. The halyard goes through a fine-tuned set of blocks down below, and the fine-tune is double-ended. One coming here and one coming here. The reason that they're here is, as opposed to just having one in the middle, is so that it can be trimmed when you're sitting in the hiked out position, or even sit here. That way you can get to it from either side without moving your weight one way or the other.
What sort of readout do you use for that, Cam?
I'm sorry?
For the fine tune, what sort of a readout do you use? How do you know how to fine tune it? What gauge do you use? Just a look at the luff of the jib?
Yeah. What you do, the approach that I take is that you trim the jib halyard to the point where you've got, kind of baseline, where you want it for max power. Okay? Some people think that's a lot of wrinkles. Some people think that's fewer than a lot of wrinkles. I happen to think it's fewer than a lot of wrinkles myself. I mean, I see folks out there who just have massive wrinkles. I mean, the sonars sail with massive wrinkles, and I don't get it. But even the fast guys say, that's the way you have to sail a sonar. But you get it, and that varies for conditions. Lighter air, you're going to want more wrinkles, and less air, you're going to want fewer. But so you get it to a baseline, and then as you start to speed up and sort of ease into point mode, then you can take up on your jib fine tune, and what it does is it kind of flattens the sail out and puts you more in point mode. And obviously there are conditions where that doesn't work. If it's really lumpy, then it doesn't pay to point. Point mode using the jib fine tune is really all about flat water like we had yesterday. In heavy air, it doesn't really move the needle, and in lump, it definitely doesn't move the needle. Yes, sir. If you look at the oldie tuning guide, there was an arc that you drew Like when the mast isn't in the boat, you measure back from the stem fitting. I drew that arc. I think it's probably still here. And you draw a center line, and that's not easy to find, by the way. And then you draw the arc. I did all that stuff. And then I drilled the first hole where it said to drill the first hole. Instead of aiming them at 45 degrees, I simply aimed them right at the stem. That's the whole thing. And, this is a long track. This could probably be this long. I mean, real heavy air, I'll move it way back, but, my two settings are here and here. Basically, huh?
You can only move you a couple inches.
It doesn't really...
You know many boats have fixed them.
Yeah,
Do very well.
Exactly. There are a lot of boats that have found their sweet spot, and they leave them there all year long, and they never touch them. And then, with respect to the sheets, the blocks are set. This is something to pay attention to. If you set your block outside of the plane of your track, then what happens is it's going to pull your standing block outside and essentially open up your sail. So it wasn't my intention. When I placed this here, it was to get a good lead to here, and I hadn't really thought about it. But it's ended up working out pretty well. I think if I had it to do over again, I probably would have put the block here, so that would actually move the stick here to here, farther in on the jib loop. But but anyway, these are ratchet blocks, and the angle of these cleats is designed so that you can be hiked out and trim this. It's exactly lined up. Final line on the jib is this fraculator. I don't know where it got that name. The idea here is that when you get near a mark, you can just pull your jib down. So this is like 1/16, 500-pound braking stuff. The other thing, by the way, that's one function of the fraculator. The other function of the fraculator is you cleat this. When you got your chute up, you cleat this, take up on your halyard, take off your backstay, take up on your halyard, pulls the mast forward a little bit, gets the chute just a little bit farther out. By the way, another thing I've noticed going downwind, in Lump, I see people with their backstays just totally loose. Their chute's going everywhere, and their mast is going everywhere. Once you get the mast ground forward, if you have a fraculator, just take a little bit of slack out of that thing. It stables the top of the mast, which stabilizes the chute, makes the boat